Hi, everyone. My name is Andy Vaughn, the host of Impactful Conversations, and I serve as the president and CEO of Alliant International University. With me today, we are pleased to have the president of the American Psychological Association, Dr. Debra Kawahara. Debra, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
And it's great to have you, especially at this time. We have so many questions to ask you about what's going on in the environment of higher ed and APA programs, clinical psychology as a career, the launch of master's degrees that are APA accredited, just tons of things to talk about, especially when it comes to psychology in that career field. So, first of all, I know you ran for president of APA about a year ago, and you probably never would have imagined what was going to land on your plate effective first quarter this year. And, true leaders like yourself take adversity and you just go, you have your battery pack and you're off to the races, and you've done just that. So maybe tell us about why did you run for APA president? And then we'll get into some details about 2025 and how life has changed a lot for higher education with the legislative changes. But first, tell us about your background and maybe why you ran for president in the first place.
Really, honestly, not till January of 2023 would I have ever thought that I would even consider running for the APA president position. Actually, if you talked to me prior to that, I probably would have said, who wants to do that? You only get a year. It's a ton of work. A lot of times it's thankless and you're not appreciated for what you're going to have to do in that position. I had tended, in terms of choosing leadership and service positions, to try and do things that, I believed in, I thought were valuable, but more kind of behind the scenes, like let me work on a project, let me join in a group, those kind of things. And when I would see a position that I was interested in because it aligned with my values or what I wanted to do, I would throw my name in the hat. And so this was not like something I strategically ultimately, I want to be APA president. That wasn't it. What ended up happening is throughout my career, as I reflect back, it really has been my values in terms of what now is called more kind of social justice, culturally, responsive, values. I mean, as you know, I had chose CSPP as a graduate student because of those very values and what the graduate program in clinical psychology was offering at the time, which was at the late 80s, which was different than other programs. Now it's standard that programs have to show that they have culture, individual differences in their curriculum. But at the time when I was applying for graduate school, the thing that stood out to me in terms of CSPP and Alliant was that they were at the forefront of integrating that throughout the curriculum. So it wasn't just this one-off class that you took. They actually wanted to train you so that it was integrated and permeated everything as you were training as a professional. That thread has been throughout my career. And so those have been things that I have chosen to do. So when the opportunity came up and someone approached me, it was like the second wave of the anti-Asian hate and violence. And around that time, there was also the conversation about visibility and representation. There had only been one Asian American who had been president of the association, and the history was at that time probably 130 years. Only one. And so I really felt a responsibility to consider it when I was approached. And I actually talked to, my mentors and friends, and they said, part of it is timing, that people are approaching you, and that I felt like I had the experience, the background, the skills to be a good president. What I ended up doing is really asking myself the question about what would I do in the position? It wasn't so much that I wanted the position or status, but what would I do if I got the position? And part of it was that I wanted to continue the movement of the association to be inclusive of everyone, that it's going to represent all of psychology and be that everyone could belong to the association, but also the work of the association would benefit society for everyone. And so I really felt a responsibility to run, and I ran and I won. So I really felt like the membership was saying they felt also that I could do a good job in this position and believed in what I had put as my platform.
And you have. You've done a great job, and you're coming up on the last quarter of your presidency. So you had in mind what that 1 year was going to look like when you ran for president. And then in late January, early February, a lot of changes started happening out of Washington, D.C., especially on the executive and legislative sides of the branches of government. So a lot of changes for APA, a lot of changes of the kinds of organizations that APA supports, whether it be universities, colleges, or clinics or nonprofits. A lot of funding cuts came almost immediately in your term as president. Tell us about the adversity you faced as president and a couple of different angles on this. One, how did you handle that? It was happening in your first couple of months on the job. And number two, what advice can you give someone to have a balance of life where it doesn't just take every ounce of your energy, including your personal life, away when you face such adversities? What advice can you offer in that arena?
Okay, well, let's start with the first one, which is the last 9 months, 8 months that I've been in this position. I have to say, I went in and you have hope and you have purpose, and it's like, okay, I'm taking this on. But I have to say, I did not know what we were gonna be facing. I guess I think about it as, recently we have gone through the pandemic and none of us could have imagined what that was like. I think this was similar. There was no way that you could have prepared or predicted the changes and the challenges and the issues that I was going to be facing and the association was going to be facing along the way. I think the one thing that I learned during this time was that there were lots of unknowns. There was many issues coming at us simultaneously. What I think helped is I wasn't alone. There's a team that I was working on, and that it was really important for us to be able to communicate, to not be reactive. We had to hold on to what is our mission, what is our value in order to guide us in terms of just stability, right? We knew that things were unstable for people, was creating a lot of confusion and chaos, and we had to be kind of a stable base for people. And the base is based on our mission and our values to guide us, right? And that we don't lose sight of that, because that's kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, our North Star,
Yeah, totally agree.
So anyway, so I think for me, it was okay, you know, we just have to kind of keep steady. We have to communicate with our membership so they know that it's not that we're not doing anything or not thinking things out. We are, and we're thinking them out intentionally, strategically, and thoughtfully, right? That we're not just going to be reactive, but that we're trying to be deliberative, if that makes sense.
It does.
I think that's really, really important. But I think communicating that we're not doing nothing was also a piece
Yeah.
of it, so that
Yeah.
people
Agreed.
knew, right, that we were engaged. You may not be seeing us publicly doing something, but we are in the process of trying to assess, trying to figure out what we are going to do and do it in an intentional way.
And when that occurs, I think you are right on target. You have to let your constituents know because they're not going to see it or feel it. So you have to communicate, hey, we know what's going on. We're on top of it. Here's an outline of what we're doing. You're not going to see this in plain sight, but this is what's going on behind the scenes. It builds a lot of confidence, to your point.
Mhm. And I think the other thing that we eventually were able to do was put a response center together that was updated with kind of the issues and then what is happening and any response, but also collecting stories and impacts of how the different changes were personally impacting people,
Yeah.
and lives. And we have found out that that is one way also to be able then to go to the legislators and say, okay, we have numbers, we have the science, we have numbers, but here's some real stories of how it's impacting. And so it kind of creates that personal aspect of it where it's like, these are real people. These are real lives that are being affected. That took some time to put together. And I know in the moment of urgency that people want action, but it does take time to come up with what actions you're going to take so that they make impact.
Yeah, agree with that. I think it's better to be right on target with your message and your strategy so you can execute it 100%, even if it takes a little bit more time, because these are internal deadlines that we create ourselves. And
Right.
the masses, why aren't you acting now? We need something now. And you got to call time out on that. And it's hard to resist that because everybody wants you to say something right now and do something
Yeah.
right now. And in most cases, it's actually a little bit better if you just take a little bit more time and plan thoughtfully, carefully. And when you sleep on things and you iterate things, they tend to be a better product on the back end. So I'm glad you did that because what's happening now is you're taking a very thoughtful approach and now everyone is seeing it and feeling it. So thank you for your leadership on that. Now, to the second part of the question,
Okay.
you didn't ask for these things when you ran for president. We had no idea that the changes were going to happen on federal funding. So, what advice can you give to leaders when something hits out of left field and you just have to deal with it and go through? How do you balance your life in that situation?
Yeah. I think what I've learned and what I've seen is you can never predict what you're going to get as a leader. One of the things that I have heard that has been very helpful is that you can prepare as a leader, you can't predict everything. And so it is having that agility to be able to, you're going to be having to face things that I don't think any of us could have imagined the pandemic, could have imagined this, kind of the current context that I'm having to lead in as I have gone through my career. It's like, yeah, you can kind of plan, but being open that that plan may need to significantly be changed or actually even maybe thrown out because of current events that you're having to deal with as a leader and being okay with that. That, okay, yeah, we may have to totally regroup because of what's
Yeah,
being asked of us,
yeah, yeah,
but that it's like we need to come together and figure out what we need to do. It doesn't mean that it's been a failure or whatever. It just means the circumstances have changed.
I love that you said that. So many times organizations have a strategic plan written in stone and they think they cannot deviate. We came up with this plan. It is well thought out. We're not going to deviate. And then around them, the market and the world is changing, but they're sticking to that original plan before the changes took
Yeah.
place. Examples would be Kodak, Woolworths, and a host of other companies you don't even know existed today because they stuck to that one plan. And meanwhile, the audience around them, their constituents, had different ideas because the world was changing and they stuck to that plan. So I'm so happy to hear you talk about adaptability and willingness to change. And sometimes, those old quotes of never give up. Well, that applies in most situations, but not all. Sometimes you got to go, wait, this is not working. We should call a timeout, kind of come up with a new plan, relaunch and re-engage. So I'm so happy you said that because today's times require that. So thank you for your
Absolutely.
adaptability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, even if we take it on an individual level, we are asked to adapt, to adjust, to cope. And I think organizations are also asked to do that, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
right?
And sometimes the universe is sending you messages, and if you ignore them, sometimes it's a gut feeling, it's from the heart, or sometimes you see hard data that something has changed, and you just go, no, we got to stick to our plan. So I think being reasonable and adaptable are two qualities today that are highly underrated. in
Mhm.
organizations. Earlier today, you talked about values.
Mhm.
And that's a really important topic for me and our organization at Alliant, the impact values that you know and live yourself. I'm so happy you talked about that because in times of adversity, I think the knee-jerk reaction is typically let's just look at data and numbers and just let's attack it from that standpoint, which is really important to do. You have to have the data to make decisions, but there's also the culture part of it, the communication part of it, the values part, your behaviors. Are you being respectful? Whatever your values are for your organization and for you as an individual, I think we don't take enough time to reflect, to pause, and really think about our behaviors because what happens to the best of leaders in times of adversity, especially when there's a time crunch related to our deadline, I think we forget about the people aspect of it and motivation and values. And you actually have to double down. I learned this from a CEO about 20 years ago I worked for. And I remember we were going through a big change and he spent so much time for 2 weeks just talking about the values. I'm thinking, why aren't we going into the boardroom and coming up with data? And I watched him do this very thoughtfully. And then we went after the data, but it's to get everyone level set and aligned on our behaviors. How are we feeling? How are we going to approach this from a value standpoint and a mission driven standpoint? So maybe you could expand on that just a little bit because I love that aspect.
As you were talking, what it made me think about is leadership. Yes, there's the goal setting, the data driven decisions that we make, kind of the more concrete managerial executive skills that we would talk about. Yes, so that's very important, right? But I also think, in addition to that, a good leader also thinks about the relational piece. And I think you were talking about what that CEO kind of did was, let me connect with you first. Let's see the human side of this first before we then go into kind of the data informational side of this to get to whatever work that we needed to do. And I think it's really important that both of those are considered critical in terms of leadership. If we think about it, it's like when you're having to have difficult conversations or having to make hard decisions, you're going to have a better chance of people being able to accept it if you have a good relationship. Even, I'm going to say, even for you as a university president, you're going to have to, we know, given higher education, that there's going to have to be hard decisions made.
Mhm.
But your relationship with the staff, with the faculty, with students, all of that will make a difference in terms of when those decisions have to be communicated and have to be implemented, right? That the two kind of go together. That if they see you as someone that, okay, we know that he's not doing this decision without thinking about its impact on people, right? That they actually trust you. They know that you care about them as people, not just, well, you're just an employee here, right? Just a number. That those hard decisions, the communication of those hard decisions and implementation of them are going to be taken more to heart. Like, he must have had to do this for the good of our university. And so I guess I would say the relational piece is as important as the goals, decision making, data, and information side. And sometimes that gets forgotten, I think,
That's
by
right. And you
leaders.
mentioned something that I label as what I call decisions made for the greater good of the organization can never be wrong. And
Hmm.
so sometimes they're tough and we have to think about the greater good when making those decisions. But as long as you follow your values and your behaviors match those values and they're
Hmm.
made with the mission of the organization in mind at the end, I think you can't go wrong on that. So yeah, I agree with you. Thank you for sharing that. So when you were running for APA president, and obviously it was a good campaign because you won the presidency, you ran on a platform, I believe it was called Strength and Unity. Can you talk about that? What does that mean to you?
Part of it is growing up from a Japanese culture and lots of Asian cultures, the belief that the collective is always going to be stronger than the individual standing on their own. And so it is bringing together groups and figuring out how do we have what in social psychology is called a superordinate goal, that it's for all of us. We may be working in different ways, but ultimately we have the same goal and outcome. And I think strength and unity to me comes from the diversity and richness of that diversity, and us then being able to figure out how do we integrate all that diversity together. That if you think about it being woven together, the diversity, how much stronger than that cloth, that net is, and so that strength and unity to me is kind of a conviction. It's not just a slogan, but it's something I really believe in. And I believed in it for the association, that we're stronger together given the diversity of specialties that we have across psychology, the different things that psychologists can do, that if we can figure out how we all can work together and whatever strengths and whatever ways work for you, that we're going to be better for it and everyone will be better for it.
I agree with that 100%. So you're about 9 months in to the presidency of the APA, American Psychological Association. What have you learned about APA that maybe you didn't know until being more in this role, that was a pleasant surprise, or something you just didn't know until you got in this role about the organization?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that has given me joy and purpose is when I actually meet the members of the association and see, the work that they're doing, whether it's advocacy for people that they're trying to get services for, or students who, they're out there and they're so excited about the field and what they would like to do to contribute to society. Those that are fighting for keeping their research going on because they know that that information and that science is so critical to us taking care of people. So I think it's just, the members who I just have seen day in and day out doing those kind of things. And it's like, wow, we are contributing, we are important, and we are valuable.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. That is really heartfelt. So let's switch gears slightly and talk about the education components of APA.
Okay.
We understand that there's a demand for an accredited master's degree, and we see that happening now in real time. So there's the master's program in clinical psychology, but what else is ahead of us?
One of the areas that they're really focusing on is AI and trying to figure out how that is going to impact, I think, all spheres of our lives, and education is one, which I think we have already begun to see. And so I think APA is trying to figure out how do we utilize it, but also provide the safeguards for it, because I think we know it's here. I kind of relate it to when they first got calculators out, and it's like, you know what? Now it's just going to be a tool that students are using, that people are using. I mean, we don't even think about it now as like you have to cite using a calculator or whatever, right? I think one of the things is AI is going to change a lot of things. And I think one of the ways is in education. And I think us thinking about how is it going to impact education in general, but also then how do we integrate it in terms of, being a professional university? How do we then provide the education and training so that students start getting the skills that they're going to need with AI being in the world, in their profession? And so I think that is one thing that APA realizes and is actually taking an active role in that arena.
That's great. I think AI is going to change education as it is every sector. Education has a tendency to be a little bit more slow to adapt but I don't think we have that timeline anymore in the world. We have to adapt a lot quicker than we have in the past. And so hopefully both the institutions and accreditors understand now's not the time to be forming 2 years of committees to discuss these changes, because by the time you get to the end, the world has changed yet again, or probably about 10 times by then. So I'm so happy you're on top of that. Related to education, what advice would you give someone looking into a career to be a clinical psychologist?
One of the things that I have always talked about is how robust the degree is. My advice would be not to close yourself off too early in terms of when you're deciding if it is a clinical psychology degree that you're pursuing. There are so many areas within psychology and even in clinical psychology that you can focus on. And I think the one thing I would say is you may have a certain interest, and to figure out, your interests and your strengths, and then figure out how can you utilize that being a clinical psychologist. Because in psychology, I think you could have any interest and find an area that could be utilized. So that's what I would say is I think explore, kind of get to know yourself and what you like and what your strengths are, and then try and figure out, okay, how do I put that together with this degree that or this profession that I'm pursuing?
Have you seen oftentimes when a student comes in before they start the program and they are dead set on a specialization, and they get into the program and they talk to others and maybe their professor or program director in clinical psychology and completely change? It seems to me like it must be the vast majority, but I'm from the outside looking in. Is that about right, though? When you talk about an open mind, that one comes to mind.
Yep, I think you hit it on the head because, to me, and of course I chose psychology, it is so interesting and all the different things that you're going to learn about it. What you end up seeing is maybe I'll do that, or maybe I might do this. As they're starting to get exposed to all the different things in psychology, it kind of opens this Pandora box of all these different things that are possibilities. And so you do see that sounds that's intriguing, right? Or that's thought provoking, or I'm intellectually curious about this. And so you do see them kind of, let me just check this out a little bit more.
I just learned last week that the largest single employer of licensed clinical psychologists in the United States is the Veterans Administration, and I didn't know that before. It tells you that there are so many opportunities in career paths with a clinical psychology degree. What are some of the other ones out there that maybe people don't know about? What can you do with that degree? We always think about hospitals and clinics, but I know we've got students that work in the prison systems and schools, the Veterans Administration. What are some of the little unknown career paths for clinical psychologists?
One of the areas that I see more clinical psychologists doing is actually being in workplaces, because now we're seeing, that employers are understanding the workplace is a major area that people spend many hours of their life. And so how do you make a healthy workplace? So we see psychologists in that arena. I think other places, which you talked about, but community mental health centers or health centers. One of the things that I think is becoming more realistic is placing them in places where people go to. So I've known about rural and frontier areas, and they're putting them in the Department of Agriculture or the county ag department, as opposed to, you have to go to the hospital or clinic, so that it's somewhere and that they'll be more willing to go there without the stigma. I think psychologists are finding themselves being placed in other settings than what would traditionally be. I know in universities, they're trying to put them out more on the campus so that they're not in like one counseling center office. People are trying to figure out how do we naturally place them in places that people go to so they're easily accessible.
Well, our guest today on Impactful Conversations has been Dr. Debra Kawahara, president of the American Psychological Association and also associate dean of Alliant University in the California School of Professional Psychology. Debra, always a pleasure to talk to you. And we look forward after your term as president to have you come on back to Alliant University as well.
I am certainly looking forward to that too. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Debra.